Once Upon a Time in America is one of the most haunting poetic crime films ever made. A beautiful tragedy examining lost time, broken friendships, and the blurred line between memory and fantasy. But for decades, the version most people saw wasn't the full picture. Sergio Leone's original vision was cut, slashed, and rearranged, his intricate narrative shattered for the US market. Then, almost 30 years later, the film was reborn. In 2012, a long-awaited restoration premiered at Cannes, adding over 20 minutes of footage back into the movie based on some of Leone's notes, scenes that deepen character arcs, restore narrative balance, and unlock new emotional weight. The new cut is not a like-for-like recreation of the original Cannes cut back in the 80s, which is now lost to time, but it's essentially an assembly of the only workable footage that was available, added to the European theatrical cut. In this video, we're going to explore those restored scenes, what was added, what they mean, and how they change the way we understand Leone's final masterpiece. Before we dive into the restored scenes, we have to talk about why they were missing in the first place. As I mentioned in detail in a previous video, when Once Upon a Time in America was released in the United States in 1984, what American audiences saw was a drastically altered version, cut down from nearly 4 hours to just 2 hours and 19 minutes. That's over 90 minutes of footage removed. But worse than just being shortened, the entire film was re-edited into chronological order. Leone had constructed the movie as a non-linear memory piece, fragmented, poetic, and disorientating. He wanted the audience to feel the unreliability of Noodle's memories, to question what was real and what was imagined. But the American distributors didn't trust the audiences to follow the time jumps, so they flattened everything out. Gone was the opium den framing, gone was the ambiguity, gone were entire subplots, character moments, and emotional beats. The film became a straightforward gangster story, something Leone never intended. It was a complete betrayal of the director's vision. That's what makes the restored scenes so important. Yes, the restored scenes are not of the same visual quality as the rest of the film, but they're essential to understanding the true emotional arc and thematic depth of the story, so we can get as close as we can to Leone's true vision for the film. Perhaps a full review of the extended edition of the movie is something we can do in a future video, but for now, let's take a look at the restored scenes. The 2012 restored version of the film adds 6 scenes to the movie. I can show a fair bit of them, but I've had to chop and change slightly to avoid copyright issues. The first is when Noodles visits the tombs. After Noodles looks upon his name on the memorial stone, he meets the cemetery director, played by Oscar winner Louis Fletcher, who is completely absent from the traditional cut of the film, and gets more information about the memorial. The director tells Noodles that the friend of the deceased, David Aronson, gave them carte blanche with the design of the tomb. Aronson is of course the real name of Noodles, but it obviously wasn't he who commissioned the tomb. At this point in the story, of course, we're not to know that Max is still alive, and obviously it was he who actually sponsored the tomb. The director says all he suggested was the music that plays when the door opens, Cockey's theme, and the inscription on the door, "Your youngest and strongest will fall by the sword," which is of course what was written on the prison that Noodles went to. The director clocks on that Noodles must know this Aronson, so asks him to let him know how much he likes the haven, as she puts it, when he sees him next.
Was this Mr. Aronson's idea?
Actually, he left the whole thing up to us. We had carte blanche. All he suggested was the inscription, "Your youngest and strongest will fall by the sword."
What about the music?
And the music.
That was his idea too?
Yes. We received a tape. You seem to know him so well. I'd like to ask you to tell him how much you like the haven when you see him. Would you do that?
I've been away for quite a long time, and I lost his address. I was wondering maybe he must have sent him a bill or something.
Did you ever think of building your own haven?
Noodles also sees a car nearby, realizing he's being watched. He's able to write down the license plate number. This scene adds a little more thickness to the story, with there being emphasis on the mystery as to who exactly is this person who has impersonated Noodles. It also establishes that someone is actively watching Noodles, a running beat in the deleted scenes. I think the line, "Did you ever think of building your own haven?" is quite significant, especially as Noodles simply stares at her without answering. There's a sinister undertone in that the audience at this point might infer that Noodles is being set up to be murdered and put in a haven of his own. Another way of looking at this is that it's a clue that Noodles did indeed build a haven, and that is the movie itself, because what we're watching is an opium dream that Noodles' subconscious came up with to deal with his trauma and guilt, as we discussed in further detail in a previous video. The next scene is after Noodles drives the car into the water. The men emerge and are in a jovial attitude, but Max becomes anxious because Noodles is missing and a frightened shovel keeps aiming at the water. The camera focuses on the shovel and Max becomes increasingly distressed, thinking his friend is inside it, calling out to Noodles. The scene then transitions to the 1968 timeline with Old Man Noodles looking at a garbage truck, and this scene establishes that Noodles has traced the car's license plate to a Senator Bailey's address. The car that tailed him earlier in the cemetery emerges out of the compound and explodes shortly after. This segment is pretty significant. The serene music choice as Max calls out to Noodles is strange to say the least, so I'm guessing that the original sound is lost and the restoration team just put some of Morricone's score over this scene. But it's of course mirroring a scene in the childhood storyline where the kids are in the water and Noodles thinks Max has drowned and panics, only to find that Max is alive and well, having tricked his friend. And then you have the fact that Max thinks his friend has gotten eaten up by something that can be compared to the garbage truck at the end of the film. So really, one can actually deduce that the secret of the film's ending is being revealed to us here. At the end of the film, the big question is of course whether Max threw himself into the garbage truck. And here we can see an inverse where it's he that thinks Noodles has been killed by this trash contraption. And if we link it to the earlier scene where young Noodles thinks that Max has drowned only to find Max has tricked him, is the film telling us that Max actually tricked Noodles at the end of the film and was safe and sound? Is this scene the key to understanding the end of the movie? It also acts as more evidence for the opium dream theory, as Noodles remembers the incident where Max thinks he's been taken apart by the machinery, and one could argue that this has manifested as a fantasy where Max disappears behind the garbage truck. He sees some people celebrating in a car shortly after in the 1968 storyline, and in the flashback Noodles and his friends were of course in a car as well. The car blowing up is also something to note. Is this yet another trick of Senator Bailey, knowing he's been rumbled by Noodles, that Noodles saw he was being followed, so he has his car blown up to throw the old man off the scent? Or is this a case of Bailey being in genuine danger and an assassination attempt being made against him, as would later be inferred when Bailey and Noodles finally meet, plus another deleted scene which we'll talk about? Or is it Senator Bailey killing someone else who is a danger to him, as the next scene, which is in the standard version of the film, implies, which is of Noodles watching a news report saying that the district attorney was blown up in a car and he was scheduled to testify in a hearing regarding Bailey. As he was leaving Bailey's home and was in one of Senator Bailey's cars, he must have had a meeting with Max, and the senator perhaps wasn't happy with what he said, so took him out. In the next scene, Noodles talks with a chauffeur.
They make you dress like those lunatics that run around Germany burning down all those Jewish stores.
These lunatics burned our home, sir, and made us go to America.
I'm Jewish too.
I know, sir. Everybody knows.
Knows what?
Everybody knows who you are, sir.
And what do you think?
I don't think. It's your business, sir.
No, you think. You think it's a disgrace, don't you?
We Jews, sir, don't have to be like the Italians who look up to the lawbreakers. We have enough enemies without becoming gangsters, sir.
How much money you make a week?
Well, not everybody tips like you, sir. I make enough to go to school and learn for my degree.
Good for you. So maybe by the time you're 60, you'll make enough, but then you won't be able to get it up anymore.
We establish here that Noodles is a well-known gangster, but we also see that Noodles chastises the chauffeur for being poor. This is such a small scene, but adds so much. First of all, we now know why the chauffeur didn't intervene later when Noodles was violating Deborah. It wasn't just that, he didn't think it was his place to get involved as a driver. He actively knew Noodles was a dangerous man. And crucially, the scene where Noodles offers him money after the violation and he's disgusted and doesn't take it now acts as a bookend to this deleted scene. The fact that this poor chauffeur refused to take Noodles' money and instead drives away leaving Noodles alone isn't just showing that he's disgusted, it's like he's saying, yeah, I'm poor, but at least I'm not like you. The refusal to take the money is so much more profound with this small little restored scene, and it makes you wonder, how many other gems are there in this masterpiece of Leone that we've been robbed of? The next deleted scene is set directly after this and acts as Eve's introduction. Noodles is drunk in a bar and approached by Eve. Noodles gives her a wad of bills and then, confused, asks her how much he gave her, and she lies, saying 50 and quickly pocketing the cash. It appears Eve is a hooker, and Noodles says he'll call her Deborah before they engage in some hanky-panky, before Noodles falls asleep. But it's a soft love scene, nothing like the violation we just witnessed, which allows us to contrast the way Noodles brutalized Deborah in real life versus how he is careful with her in his fantasy sex with her. I'm a little confused on the next part. He wakes up the next morning and reads a note Deborah left him on the bed about meeting him. I'm assuming this is a note that Deborah gave him before the violation. Perhaps this is in the traditional version of the film, but I don't remember. I'm guessing Noodles planned on seeing her, but got drunk instead. We then see Deborah agitated waiting at a restaurant for Noodles, who doesn't show up, before she then boards the train, with Noodles showing up just as the train leaves, as we see in the 3-hour 49-minute cut. One key thing from this scene is that it's how Noodles and Eve met, though I don't think that's really necessary. I always took it as Eve was a rebound, a random doll who Noodles didn't have as deep of an affection for as he did for Deborah, similar to Christopher's wife coming out of nowhere in The Sopranos, after we spent so long with Chris and his girlfriend Adriana. But I'm confused. Barring the possibility that this scene is simply inserted into the wrong place, it looks like Deborah was waiting for Noodles but he turned up too late. But would she really be in the mood to see him after what he did to her, just a day later? I don't know, man. This part feels kinda off to me. The next scene is of Deborah performing the final scene of Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, as Noodles watches on, before Noodles goes to visit her backstage. A fairly inconsequential scene, though I guess it is interesting for Noodles to actually see Deborah enact her dream of performing. The last scene is the longest and the most significant, taking place before Noodles meets Senator Bailey. Bailey is meeting with Jimmy, the legitimate union boss, who succumbed to a life of corruption due to the influence of Noodles' gang. It appears he now is fully immersed in a life of corruption. Jimmy and his other associates want Bailey dead because of his many mistakes, but there still remain some final organizational details to be sorted out.
I must admit this party was a wonderful idea, Mr. Secretary. It's a bit like saying I'm going up before the committee in 5 days, but my conscience is clear. The most important people in New York are my guests. It's going to be a night to remember.
Especially if the house blows up. Where are you putting the next bomb? In the freezer? Or in the toilet,
You can't even think straight anymore. I'll tell you something. There's a waiting list of people who'd like to send flowers to your funeral. I can point out 10 of them right now if you'd like me to.
Yes. But none of them wants to read my obituary in front of the committee as much as you do. You and your union.
We just want to resolve this situation clean and legal.
I've heard that same song from you for 35 fucking years. Who do you think you're talking to? I helped you to make a fortune, you and the rest of those parasites.
It was a reasonable arrangement between labor and management.
2% for them and 40% for you. You defend them and you screw them.
Come on. It's been the story of your life.
Think anybody believes you anymore?
Some. But no one believes in you anymore. Because you've made mistakes and I haven't. But that's beside the point. The important thing right now is that you and I straighten out these transfers of authority. Now, it's all as we've agreed. I've had our lawyers draw it up. All you have to do is sign.
My last will?
You're in no position to exercise your will.
I give up everything.
12% will be set aside for your boy. That way he can be assured of living to a ripe old age.
Or not, if I don't sign. Hmm?
Why don't you take care of this yourself, Max? I'd be very happy for you tonight if, during all the noise of the party, I heard a shot.
Maybe you will.
Bailey says, "Where are you putting the next bomb?" implying that the car bombing from the earlier deleted scene was actually done by Jimmy's union targeting Bailey. Either that or the district attorney was an ally of Bailey's. It seems the tables have turned on their relationship, with Max now being the one who feels the walls closing in around him and Jimmy being the smug one. Jimmy suggests that Bailey commits suicide and his son will be taken care of, adding, "I'd be very happy for you tonight if during all the noise of the party I'd hear a shot," and Max replies, "Maybe you will." This scene explains things like why the car bomb went off during the second additional scene, dramatizes Max's motivation with Noodles in the next scene. It completes the character arc of Jimmy from an idealistic and reluctant union boss to a fully fledged hoodlum, and it creates more uncertainty of what happened at the end with the garbage truck. It also shows that Max's philosophy of working for bosses, moving up in the business world and distancing himself from the smell of the streets ended up turning on him in the end. In some ways, this scene lessens the mystery of the ending, as we can clearly see that Max is pretty much a dead man anyway, and he has a reason, aside from his unfinished business with Noodles, to end his life. That is, of course, if he simply didn't just disappear and went underground after this. One could argue that since it's a drawn-out scene between two people who aren't Noodles, that it disproves the opium dream theory. Then again, Noodles is getting a "I told you so" moment here, so maybe it disproves nothing. I do enjoy this scene, and it explains a lot, but maybe I'm too attached to the standard version of the film, but I kinda prefer Senator Bailey's presence mainly being with Noodles. The exposition isn't really necessary. The climax between Max and Noodles and the ending is all about the emotion. It's an interesting scene, but perhaps for the thematic weight of the ending, it was better for this not to have been included. So there you have it. Individually, these restored scenes may seem small, but together they play a part in attempting to restore Leone's rhythm. What do you make of the restored scenes? Do you think they add to the movie? Would you rather they were left out? Let me know in the comments section below. Subscribe to the channel and thanks for watching.